Welcome everyone. So before we move on to part two of our intro to UART and start looking at the transmission that we actually discovered when we were probing the router in the next lesson, we're going to need to make a slight modification to this router. So you notice the UART connection, if I just bring it up closer to the camera here, our UART connection that we identified in the last video, we just have these through-hole pads right here. And these aren't going to be very good for us to connect to with the tools that we have. So in the next lesson, actually what we're going to be doing is we're going to be connecting this protocol analyzer and talking about it in more in depth. And we're going to use this to be able to check what's going on with that transmission. And you'll notice to connect to it, we've got these female leads here, which they're not going to connect to what we have on the board. And same with this UART to USB adapter here, we're going to be using, it's the same thing. So we're not going to be able to connect these directly to the board. And I'll just move these out of the way because we're going to use them in future lessons. So what's happened with this board most likely is that during development and testing, the designers and testers of this board, they would have been using this UART connection to get their logs out and to issue commands to the router and do various testing that they need to do. And at that point, they would have either manufactured it so that there was a header pin connected to this, or they would have just added one themselves. And then once it's gone into production, so we have a production unit here, they would remove this header because as consumers, we're not going to be needing to open it up and use this UART connection. Of course, as hardware hackers, though, we love that they've left this here and we're going to want to use it. So what we can do is we can add in our own header connection to it. And there's two ways that we can do this. The way that I'm going to cover in this video is one way that we can do it without soldering. And then in the next video, what I'll show you, and this is totally optional and up to you if you want to do it, is you can solder the header pins to this. So just a quick note before I get into the details on how we're going to, do the method without soldering. I do want to say that it's not the best option and it's not the best way to do this. The reason for that is if we do this without soldering, we're going to be opening ourselves up to potential issues down the road with the connectivity between the header pin and these pads. And this can cause just really annoying nuisances down the road where we're not sure if the problem is with what we're doing and how we're setting up our communication, or if we just have a bad connection here and we're not able to properly transmit those electrical signals. So if you are comfortable with it and up for the challenge, I really do suggest soldering. If you were doing this in a professional capacity, then you would definitely be soldering this. And if you're wanting to get into more hardware hacking down the line, then it's a really good skill and important skill to have to be able to at least make these through-hole solder connections to either do soldering or remove components by desoldering. So with that being said, you still can do everything in this course that I'm going to be doing with this header connection using the solderless method, as long as you just keep in mind if you have issues to come back and double check that connection and make sure your ground connection and voltages are all still proper. So I'll just set this down and bring over here what we're going to be doing in this lesson. So I've got the header pins here, just a set of really basic through-hole headers, and they come in these strips, and then you just break them down to how many you need. So we'll be snapping this down to the 4 that we need in a second. And then I've also got this twist tie here that it's got a plastic wrap around it, which is perfect, so it's not going to be conductive and mess anything up on our circuit that way. And it's this twist tie that comes with our router, and I have mentioned a couple times to save it. And we're going to use this to actually attach that header down in such a way that it should give us an okay connection. So I'll just set this aside for a second, and I'll bring the board closer, and I'm just going to pull the PCB out of the plastic container. And if I hold it up closer here, just from the edges, you'll notice that we've got this hole. We're kind of lucky. I'm not entirely sure what this hole is here for, but it's drilled into the board right here. And I'll just stick my pointer through it so you can see. And again, down here, it's drilled through. And we can seat those headers in here just without soldering. And if we do that, they're going to be too loose to actually have an electrical connection. But if we tighten them down by putting the twist tie through here, wrapping it around those header pins and then twisting that twist tie, we can make it so that there's going to be enough of a connection here. And I've tested this quite a few times, and as long as you get the twist tie in here good and you tighten it down, then you're going to be able to get good communication both through the protocol analyzer and to the USB to UART adapter that we're going to be using later. So I've already used these a couple times, and so I've snapped them off. So they're a little bit shorter than how they come, but it's going to be the same idea. What you can do with them is they are perforated, and you just grab them and snap them to the length that you want. So we're going to use 4 for this. You may recall that we only actually need 3 of the pins, but the more we have, the better connection physically to the board we're going to get. So it's better to use that extra one, even though we're not going to use it. So I'm just going to grab it here, and I put my thumb, if I just cover up 4 of the pins and then just put the pressure on it there, it snaps right at 4. So we've got that 4 pins here. And I'm going to take these and just slide it into the holes to start with in the connection. And it doesn't matter what the orientation of these are. It can go either way, but you're going to want the longer ones on the top and then the shorter ones in the bottom. All right, so I'll just drop them into this hole here. All right, so if you're following along, and then if you do this and you notice, like, they're really loose. They're not, like, I just touched them and they fell out. So it's not going to be sufficient for us to have any type of electrical connection. The one thing I want to show here now, and is if I just tilt this a little bit here, what you're going to want to do to get this connection to be good is you're actually going to want to tilt these on an angle just a little bit like this, like I have here. And the reason for that is I'm just going to set this down. So I'm just going to show kind of with my hands what I mean by that and how the pad works. So I'm just going to set this aside for a second so it's a little bit clear. So if you just think of my hand here, this circle being the pad, and then my pointer being the actual metal lead that's going to go through it. So right now what's happening is we're putting that lead through, and it's fitting very loosely inside of there. So we're not getting a good connection. And what we should be doing is then, putting some solder in here, and that's going to hold that in place and also provide that interconnectivity. But one way we can get around that is, the inside of the pads on this router, they actually have that metal connectivity in them. So like, it's not just the top pad itself, it's also the inside. So if we bend, this is going to be really extreme, but if we bend the pin over, then it's going to force a connection on the inside. And that's actually going to be what allows us to have that connection. If you just do it straight up and down like this, and you connect it with the zip tie, then you're not actually going to get a good connection. So I'll just bring this back over here, and I'm going to try and show it as best I can on camera, but it's honestly kind of finicky, so I'll do my best to show it on camera, and if I can't get it on camera, then I'll show you the end result. All right, so I've got it here to where I think I've got a good connection. And, if I touch it lightly, then there's no movement or wiggle, which is what you want to see on this. You don't want to give it a big push because the twist tie is not going to hold that tight. You're going to bump it out. But as long as you don't have any wiggle, then it's probably going to be good. But what I do suggest you do, and this is actually pretty important to test this, is we're going to go back now and actually retest, just like we did the first time onto the bare pads. We're going to test at the end of these pins because that's where we're going to be connecting to, and make sure they are still okay and we have that good connection. So I'm going to put this down, grab the multimeter, and just really quickly test those. Okay, I've got it back on the continuity setting, and we're just going to really quickly test the ground. So same thing we did before, but we're actually just going to test to the end of this pin. And it's a good thing we checked this because I thought that this was good on here, but I don't actually have that good connection. So I'm just going to revisit and make sure I'm pulling this down tight enough. Okay, I've just tightened this down again. I'm not really sure if you can see any of the changes I made, but I just made sure to get it a little bit tighter and try and exaggerate the angle that it was on here and how I have tightened this down. And I'm just going to test that connection again now. So I'll check the ground again with the continuity tester. Perfect, so I'm getting a beeping immediately, and I'm still going to check the other pins because just because we have that ground one down tight enough doesn't mean that we have the other one seated. So I'm just going to plug it in and we'll at least test the VCC and transmit pins and make sure they're all good as well. All right, so I've got it plugged in. I'm just going to switch my multimeter over to that 20 volt DC reading again, and we'll test quickly the VCC and ground pins in the same method that we did before. Perfect, so VCC is working, and I'm just going to test the transmit pin while I'm here. All right, and the transmit pin is working. So just a quick note, when you're testing them too, you're going to want to be probing fairly lightly on these pins to make sure you have good connection. Because if you're actually, pushing really hard down on these pins, then that kind of defeats the purpose of checking for the connection. You want to be simulating as if you were just connecting something to it where there's not going to be any pressure. So make sure you are touching lightly. And if you run into communication problems down the road with your UART connection and you did go this method of using the zip tie, then what I would do is just come back and retest every one of these pins and make sure they're working as expected with the multimeter, because eventually, this is going to loosen up and you're going to lose this connection. So keep that in mind. With that being said, in the next video, I'm going to show how to solder this and make it more permanent so we don't have to worry about that. If you're going to skip over that video, I just wanted to let you know about that, because when you're going to see me doing this in the future lessons, you will see this soldered in place because I'm going to do it in that video. You won't see this connection. So I have tested quite a few times just to make sure that it's realistically doable. And you can connect the UART to USB adapter and the protocol analyzer to those header pins with this method and reliably get that data as long as you make sure you've got it tightened down. So that wraps up this video. I'll see you either over in the next one where we do some soldering or in the final UART video where we're going to connect our protocol analyzer. So I'll see you over there.